Welcome Department of Transportation Secretary Foxx to kick off the fiscal year 2015 budget hearings. It's a good thing to start out with a conference bill that sets the foundation for the budget proposal. Chairman Rogers, who will be here shortly, Ranking Member Lowy, along with Chairman Mikulski and Senator Shelby, really moved mountains to get the fiscal year 2014 omnibus done, and we're ready to move mountains again to get the bills done for fiscal year 2015 at the set level of $1.016 billion. However, the Department of Transportation is a bit of a problem child this year, which is saying a lot when you have HUD also in the bill. Not only are the surface programs in need of reauthorization, but the trust funds are flat out of money. Next, the budget proposals to shift approximately $4 billion worth of existing programs, actually $6 billion if you look at the expansions and increases, from the discretionary general fund to mandatory, not yet in existence, transportation trust fund. I'm guessing the President will spend the $4 billion somewhere else. But if the past is a prologue, we'll need to find the $4 billion plus under the 1016 to continue those existing programs, and I'm hoping that this is not an insurmountable problem. I'm sure there'll be a question or two on those topics this afternoon, Mr. Secretary, and I look forward to our dialogue. Before we get to the questions, I'll recognize my good friend and colleague, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Pasteur, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I want to join you in welcoming Secretary Foxx to his first appearance before the subcommittee. Our colleague, Mr. Price, will provide a more formal introduction when he comes in. This morning, or this afternoon, we will discuss the President's fiscal year 2015 budget for the Department of Transportation. This budget is familiar to other budgets. It requests robust funding for many programs and shifts nearly all the surface transportation programs to the mandatory side of the budget. That, of course, is not within the subcommittee's jurisdiction. However, we can explore how to address our nation's infrastructure needs and how to ensure that our transportation system is safe and efficient. Secretary Foxx is a former member of a large city. You certainly know firsthand the important role that transportation plays in the quality of life of our citizens and the economy as a whole. I welcome you and look forward to hearing your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pasteur. I think the full committee chairman will be here shortly, but I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Lowy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Pasteur, and a very great welcome to Secretary Foxx. You really got going, and it's been a pleasure for me working with you. First of all, I want to commend the work of our chairman and Ranking Member Pasteur, who both announced that this will be their last Congress. And Iowa and Arizona, along with this committee, have benefited greatly from their service. They will be sorely missed. And as we know, this is the Secretary's first hearing before the House Appropriations Committee, and I want to thank you personally for the Department's commitment to building the new Tappan Zee Bridge, and I look forward to continuing to work with you on the project. With a 25% increase for infrastructure spending compared to the 2014 enacted level, the President's budget answers the call for rebuilding our aging country's infrastructure, which the American Society of Civil Engineers grades on average as a D. That's before you came to this position, a D. We have work to do. For every $1 billion of infrastructure investment, we create or preserve nearly 35,000 jobs, generate more than $6 billion worth of economic growth. At $18 billion above last year's bill, this budget would create over 630,000 jobs and generate $108 billion in economic activity. I'm particularly pleased that the budget request includes $825 million to assist with the implementation of positive train control on commuter and passenger rail lines. Of According to the National Transportation Safety Board, this automated technology would have prevented the devastating Metro North crash in the Bronx last December, which killed one of my constituents. I hope that the FY15 THUD bill supports this effort by helping rail lines install this technology in some way. Mr. Secretary, while we are on the topic of Metro North, I am also anxiously awaiting the results of your deep dive into Metro North's operations and the department's report to this committee on your findings. I trust that you will have something to the committee by the March 17th deadline. The budget also includes $40 million to establish the Safe Transportation of Energy Products Fund to support prevention and response activities surrounding the transportation of crude oil. The Lower Hudson Valley has recently had 2 very close calls with trains that transport crude oil. Thankfully, at the time of the derailments, the oil tankers on the trains were empty. The department and industry have taken some good first steps to make crude transport safer, but more must be done to hold responsible those accountable and safeguard communities like mine in the Lower Hudson River Valley. Lastly, as you know, Mr. Secretary, the Appropriations Committee doesn't have sole authority to provide the funding increase that you seek. Until Congress and the administration come together and agree on a pay for that assures the long-term solvency of the highway trust funds, I fear that we will continue to receive a failing grade for our country's infrastructure. The American people are looking at us for leadership. Last year, we stood at the edge of the budgetary brink and were able to pull ourselves back by supporting a compromise. This year, I hope the administration feels the same sense of urgency for addressing the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund. And I thank you again and welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. We'd now like to recognize Mr. Price from North Carolina to introduce the Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will gladly do just that. It gives me great pleasure to welcome my friend and fellow North Carolinian Secretary Anthony Foxx to the subcommittee. We look forward to his leadership and what he has to say to us today. We know that he understands the transportation and infrastructure challenges confronting our communities in North Carolina and across the country. He's been mayor of Charlotte, one of the nation's fastest growing cities, and he's been on the front lines delivering transportation services to the public and boosting economic growth and creating jobs. During his time in office, Secretary Foxx helped to improve local transportation systems and the quality of life in Charlotte. I'll just name a few of his efforts, extending the Lynx light rail system, the largest capital project ever undertaken by the city, breaking ground on the Charlotte streetcar project, which will leverage federal and city financing to establish rail service in a critical corridor, expanding the Charlotte Douglas Airport, which is the 6th busiest airport in the world. Secretary Foxx now leads an agency with more than 55,000 employees and a $70 billion budget that oversees our government's efforts to build the safest, most efficient transportation system in the world. As the President said in nominating Secretary Foxx, he's got the respect of his peers, mayors, governors all across the country. As a consequence, I think he's going to be extraordinarily effective. We all know we have pressing needs across the nation, infrastructure needs. I trust that Secretary Foxx's experience at the local level is exactly what the doctor ordered at this point. It's going to prove extremely valuable, shaping national transportation policy. And I know he'll work tirelessly for national multimodal transportation investments that will further our nation's prosperity and quality of life. So welcome, Mr. Secretary. You're off to a great start, and we're happy for the first time, really, to welcome you to this subcommittee here today.
Excuse me, yeah,
There we go.
that's
Sorry
on. Can you hear now? Okay.
I want to say a particular word of thanks to the chair and the ranking member of the subcommittee and I know that I speak on behalf of advocates of transportation everywhere when I say that both of you will be deeply missed. Today I'm here to discuss the President's 2015 plan for the nation's transportation system. While I come here as the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, our department supports all 50 states and territories and a host of local and regional project sponsors. Today I also speak for them. What concerns our department and our stakeholders is what concerns many of you. Year after year, we've shored up the Highway Trust Fund with short-term measures, and now it's running out again, perhaps as early as August. On top of that, our last surface funding bill was a 2-year bill rather than a 6-year bill like the ones that came before it. When I speak to folks on the ground, including mayors and governors, heads of DOTs in your states, they tell me that this funding and policy uncertainty is creating an invisible crisis in our country. A crisis where they're not willing or able to put new projects on the books because they don't know if they can fund them, which means they're leaving our already crumbling infrastructure to crumble further. To put a finer point on it, since 2009, our surface transportation programs have been operating under short-term extensions 9 times, including a 2-day lapse in March of 2010. And there have been 18 continuing resolutions, including 8 in fiscal year 2011. Overall, our nation has a massive infrastructure deficit, including 100,000 bridges that are old enough to qualify for Medicare, and billions of dollars in backlog highway and transit needs. According to the World Economic Forum, our infrastructure quality has fallen to 25th in the world. To address these challenges, we must confront 2 realities. The first is that we're underinvesting, and the second is that our system is underperforming from an efficiency standpoint. If you can imagine America's infrastructure as a house, we have had years of termites in the basement. In effect, we are spending money by allowing the cost of repairs to rise as the damage becomes more extensive. The most fiscally responsible path is to invest significantly more in our system, which will spur job growth and allow us to meet growing new capacity needs and deferred maintenance. By working together, we can change these trends for the better. And it is in that spirit that a couple of weeks ago, President Obama laid out his vision for a 4-year, $302 billion transportation plan that will put us back on the path of solving this problem. To fill the hole in the Highway Trust Fund, the plan draws on savings from pro-growth business tax reform, a bipartisan pay-for, and I should point out that Chairman Camp has released his own variation of this proposal, which suggests to me that there's an opportunity to get something done. In fact, we in the administration are also sending a bill to Congress that will provide program-by-program details behind every budget request that we have. To the issue of underperformance, we can and should continue to improve on efficiency within our system, and our proposal aims to do so. Our proposal enables us to redouble our efforts to increase the value proposition for transportation dollars spent, and we can do so without compromising project integrity or the environment. That's why major new initiatives in the President's budget include putting a premium on streamlining through an interagency review process and on incentives to catalyze innovation at the local and the state level. The American people need and deserve funding certainty so they can plan. I would encourage the committee and Congress to do something different. Shock the world. Let's get a long-term funding plan in place and move America forward. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much for your comments. I guess we all understand the trust fund situation and run out in August, and the situation we've had with short-term extensions and all of that. In your budget, you've got, like you talked about, your 4-year, $203 billion proposal as far as infrastructure, and you said you're going to be sending up specific legislation.
Yes, sir.
When can we expect that?
We aim to send that legislation as early as possible in April.
In April?
Yes, sir.
Does that include also the funding mechanisms?
Details of the funding mechanism were alluded to in the budget proposal, in the Treasury section of the proposal.
Specifically that are going to pay for this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But that will not be part of your legislation?
Well, just to elaborate further on the pay for, what is contained in the budget proposal under the Treasury section are several areas of opportunity in pro-growth business tax reform, including the $1 to $2 trillion of estimated corporate profits that are overseas. Included in that is also reducing accelerated depreciation and eliminating LIFO. And those are three different ways. I would say to you that there are many ways to address pro-growth business tax reform. We're open to the suggestions of Congress on that, but that's really a Treasury discussion. It's one of those discussions that we are part of, but it's a Treasury.
You're not going to specify what you're talking about?
Well, I've given three very clear ideas that are contained in the budget proposal.
But they won't be in your bill?
Our bill will come in April. We'll have a discussion about what the contents of that bill are at that time.
Well, I'm concerned, you know, talk about short-term extensions and start-stop, and you're basically, I think, in your pro-growth reforms, they talk about a one-time revenue influx of approximately $150 billion, and which is not sustainable, right?
Well, it's sustainable over a period of 4 years, which is several grades better than 2 years or 18 continuing resolutions.
But you're not going to specify what they are?
Well, as I say, this is a dialogue, not a monologue, and we are looking for areas of opportunity to have bipartisan cooperation on a pay-for. Pro-growth business tax reform has a bipartisan interest, and we think there's an opportunity to get to yes.
Maybe you're not aware, I know. Secretary LaHood, we had several conversations back and forth in public and private about funding for reauthorization for long-term funding streams. Are you making any proposals for that?
Well, we believe that in terms of the President's proposal, that 4 years of multiple years of funding and policy certainty would do a lot more than what we've been able to do in the last few years.
But no permanent fix. So you're talking about another start-stop thing.
Well, I believe, sir, that that having been on the local level and having experienced what it's like to not know what the future holds even 6 months or 12 months from now, that a 4-year bill would be light years ahead of where we've been.
Are you suggesting any increase in the gas tax or vehicle miles driven or any other long-term funding?
Not in this proposal, sir, but we remain open to ideas that Congress has. To be honest with you, if there are other ideas that Congress has to solve this problem, we've expressed our openness to.
Have you taken those off the table that the administration previously did?
We have been very clear that we are open to any ideas that Congress has on this subject.
So that's a change in policy?
Well, it's our position today.
Which would be a change of policy. Okay. Okay, why don't we go, Mr. Pastor, if you want to see,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Foxx, this is not a situation in which it's directed to you in terms of that you're responsible for the situation. But I think that the chairman, as he asked those questions and looking at fiscal year 2015, that being an election year, being that probably major proposals which include infrastructure development as well as tax reform, the probability is pretty small that it's going to happen. But the closer reality is that come August, the Highway Trust Fund will probably be, if near broke, if not broke. And so trying to be more of a realist and trying to help you as Secretary of Transportation, have you and your staff looked at, come August, Congress is gone for vacation or elections, what you would plan to do with in informing the local ADOTs, Department of Transportation, et cetera?
Well, a couple of points on this. We believe that this situation will increasingly become dynamic as we get closer into the summer. There are a host of variables that have to be taken into account, including the facility of individual states at the point in time that we would reach the point that you're talking about, which, as we've said, is potentially as early as August.
Right.
So we are prepared to manage through the event should it occur, but our specific plans will have to be developed based on exactly what's happening at that particular time. And so we do not have what I would say is a blueprint today, but we are prepared and obviously looking at the Highway Trust Fund from month to month. We are making sure we're staying in contact with the states, and our plans will evolve as we get closer to that point. But I would also point out that our goal is to avoid that situation, as I think is probably everyone's goal in here. And we remain open to continuing the dialogue and hopefully coming up with an answer together with Congress.
Well, I agree that that's the goal, but achieving that goal sometimes is a few yards away, and but you have to plan for what would be what is a likely situation, and so trying to be a realist and trying to wish you success. I would counsel you that probably Plan A ought to be come August, that you will probably have to implement a plan that goes back to the states and local jurisdictions, and deal with the trust fund so that the injury or the hardship doesn't fall on too hard, and we're able to at least accomplish a few things.
Congressman, Mr. Ranking Member, I would tell you that having spoken already to many governors and state DOTs, that I cannot overemphasize the impact of going over the cliff for the states, including the fact that they're going to be letting contracts in July, I've heard from some states, and if we don't have certainty on the funding situation, there will be projects that may not get moving as a result. And it'll be hard to get those projects moving again later. I think that's probably the story that I can tell you from a local perspective, is that at some point, if Congress solves this problem, what we're losing the opportunity to do is to keep the pipeline of projects moving from the design phase all the way through completion. And over years and years and years of short-term measures, that's the problem that we're facing. So this is a problem that Congress has to solve, but I will say to you that I will spend every ounce of my energy and time with you to try to help find a bipartisan solution.
I appreciate it. Appreciate that, Mr. Secretary, so I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pastor. Mr. Dent?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Secretary Foxx. Thanks for welcome to the job, and good to have you here in front of the subcommittee. I'm not going to belabor the point either on the trust fund challenges, except to say that, there's some states out there like mine, Pennsylvania, literally bit the bullet on transportation funding fairly recently and did what they felt they had to do, and there was a lot of revenue. There was revenue in that equation as well, and I recognize that we're going to have to work together in a bipartisan, bicameral, and way to resolve this problem, and it's going to require a lot of leadership on the part of the administration too. to help us deal with this funding issue, and I think in a responsible way, and in consultation, too, with Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member Rahal, who are going to have a lot to say about this. I don't expect you to respond to that. You've talked enough about it already, but I know we're going to have to confront it. I want to move to the hazardous material safety permit issue. I wanted to highlight an issue one of my constituents has brought to my attention. For a few years now, a company in my district has voiced a lot of concerns about the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration hazardous material safety program. This constituent's frustrations are twofold. He believes the standards used to evaluate carriers do not accurately measure safety, and two, the current rules do not provide an appeals process prior to automatically being denied a permit. These seemingly arbitrary rulings are having real consequences and effect on their livelihoods in a lot of industries in my area. And pursuant to MAP 21, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration was required to conduct a study of the HMSP program. That study should have been completed and reported back to Congress by October 1st of 2013. To date, we have not received that report. When can Congress expect that report, Secretary?
Sir, I will have to come back to you with a specific answer on the status of that report. I will go back to my staff and ask them to update your staff on that. I'm also aware that you and the administrator of the Federal Motor Carriers, Ann Farrow, have spoken earlier this week about a specific situation.
Yeah, and I just want to say, too, that I want to commend Administrator Farrow and her staff for the hard work in pursuing these available remedies for my constituents under the current regulatory structure, and and her staff have been very, very helpful. And while the work is certainly appreciated and much remains to be done to fix the current shortcomings and inequities currently in the present regulatory structure, I'm aware that this FMCSA, again, wants to pursue a compliant safety accountability rulemaking before handling any of these HMSP issues. And considering Federal Motor Carrier Safety previously accepted a petition for the HMSP rulemaking, I'm looking for your commitment that you will seriously consider expediting regulatory consideration of fixes to the hazardous material safety program. And in the meantime, I simply ask that you utilize your agencies to the fullest extent possible to review where you have the authority to pursue administrative remedies and expedite interim solutions as soon as possible, because this is creating some real hardships in states like mine, where we have a lot of mining activities and extraction and cement and others at the quarrying that goes on. It's having a very real impact. So I appreciate your consideration and that of Ann Farrow. On the issue of contract tower funding, the budget request, President's budget request included $140 million for the contract tower program. $10.35 million is used for the contract tower cost share program. And there are 200, by the way, currently there are 252 airports in 46 states that participate in that program, including 5 in my state. Can you elaborate on DOT's possible support for this important air traffic safety program in FY15? This is a very important issue in my district as well.
Yes, the FAA's fiscal year 2015 budget request includes funding to continue to operate the contract tower program. Given today's constrained budget environment and the increasing demand on our aviation system, Congressman, the FAA is taking a hard look at all the services they provide, and as you know, there's a reauthorization process that will be underway in FY15, and so we'll have more discussion about that, but at present, that's what our budget contains.
Okay. And how much time do I have, Mr. Chairman? How much time do I have? Okay, thank you. And then I'll just quickly go to airport infrastructure funding. The FAA has faced repeated financial obstacles, as you know, in recent years. We had the partial FAA shutdown in 2011, the government shutdown, and I just want to say the President's proposal to fund highway and transit investments assumes that the Highway Trust Fund will receive a one-time infusion of revenues from tax reform. What support is there within the administration for improving our nation's airports, and can you speak a little bit about the FAA and its budget proposal?
Well, obviously our air system is very important, and our proposal would do a couple of things. First, it would implement a PFC charge that large hub airports could implement. It gives them flexibility to have more local control over resources, and we would reduce the AIP program by about $350 million. That reduction is basically paid for by the additional flexibility with the larger airports. The small airports are not affected by that. And so for the small airports, they're more or less held harmless, but there's more flexibility for the larger hub airports.
Thank you. Mr. Den has a really good way of asking a question just when the light turns red. Good job. Ms. Loy. You want to yield? I was going to recognize you, and then you could yield to Mr. Rogers.
Pleasure.
And then
to
I will
you.
recognize you again.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to yield to this distinguished chairman of the whole committee,
I thank
Mr. Rogers.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I apologize for being late to the hearing. Consequently, I have a statement I'll make rather than a question, Mr. Secretary, but thank you for being here, and thanks for your hard work. Because Ranking Member Loy and I have committed to move all 12 appropriations bills singly through the subcommittees to the full committee, the floor, conference with the Senate. We plan to move our process along at a very brisk pace this year. Thus, this hearing is one of the earliest in history. Unquestionably, this return to regular order is critical to crafting bills that wisely expend taxpayer dollars. The fiscal 14 omnibus package, I started to say ominous, which it is, but the omnibus package that we put together and passed in January through the work of this subcommittee and the other subcommittees on appropriations. A prime example of what we can accomplish together. This committee was able to provide every facet of the federal government with adequate, responsible funding while continuing to reduce federal spending, totaling $165 billion in cuts since 2010. And while these hard-fought reductions on the discretionary side of the ledger have been critically important and given us all an opportunity to make our government more lean and more efficient, the reality is that we need to tackle our mandatory spending programs, where 2/3 of spending is now located, the real driver of our debt. And yet I see no leadership from this administration to tackle that issue head on in its budgetary submissions, including yours. Quite to the contrary, your budget proposal proposes to shift even more money into mandatory programs for infrastructure spending, offloading about $4.2 billion worth of fiscal 14 programs and activities over to the mandatory side, where the problem is. And just as disappointing, your proposal once again utilizes budget gimmicks that Congress has time and again said no to. Doubling of passenger facility fees, a non-existent, non-authorized transportation trust fund that no one knows what it is. Candidly, Mr. Secretary, our committee, we can't budget with imaginary money, and neither should you try. I'm also concerned about the priorities this administration has, which continues to push billions of dollars towards short stretches of high-speed rail projects when roads and bridges around the country are falling apart. California is banking on receiving upwards of $40 billion for its high-speed rail projects, including $2.5 billion in fiscal 15 alone. How can we look our constituents in the eye and with a straight face tell them that a stretch of high-speed railway in California with sparse ridership potential is a better use of federal tax dollars than bridges over the Ohio River or an interstate highway through eastern Kentucky? It's our job to ask these questions and set these priorities straight in our appropriations process, and that's what this is all about. So thank you for being here and hearing us out. How are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and because the gentlelady was so gracious, she'll be recognized for 5 minutes.
You are very kind. And it's a pleasure again to welcome you here, Mr. Secretary. Over the past year, as you well know, there have been 5 rail accidents on Metro-North system in New York and Connecticut, which resulted in 6 deaths, nearly 130 injuries, one of whom was a constituent of mine. In fact, just 2 days ago, another Metro-North worker was struck and killed by a train. DOT did launch a comprehensive and systemic safety review of Metro-North's operations in December. This committee requested a final report on DOT's findings by March 17th. Can we expect to see your final report by March 17th? Can you give us a preview of the findings? And are you getting everything you need from Metro-North?
Madam Ranking Member, first of all, we appreciate your leadership in leading the charge in requesting that report. Our staff has been working very hard with Metro-North on the Operation Deep Dive. Our goal is actually to beat the deadline, and I feel like things are tracking well there. Our staff will be in touch with yours and with the committee as this process moves along, but I expect to beat the deadline.
Thank you. Now, the budget requests $825 million to help implement positive train control systems on commuter railroads. The NTSB has stated that if positive train control had been installed on Metro-North's tracks, the deadly derailment in the Bronx would have been prevented. As you well know, the freight and passenger railroads are required to implement PTC by 2015. How many railroads do you expect to meet the 2015 deadline, and what happens to those that don't meet the deadline? And the budget assumes that positive train control funding will be phased out by 2018. Will you request that the implementation deadline be extended beyond 2015? And without the funding you requested in the budget, how difficult will it be for the commuter railroads to meet the 2015 deadline? And is the Railroad Rehabilitation and Improvement Financing Program a viable option to fund PTC? Do you have any active applications for this purpose? And I thank you. If you can remember all of them, let's talk about positive train control.
Sure.
In the couple of minutes left.
Sure, and any responses that I don't provide directly to the questions that you asked, I would like to submit to the record more full answers to those questions. The short answer is that we're hearing from railroads all the time about this the December 31st, 2015 deadline. Many of them are telling us that they will not be able to meet the deadline. We are very committed to getting PTC implemented, but just being very blunt, that's what we're hearing from the railroad community. Despite the difficulties of it, we are committed to doing everything we can at DOT to encourage and help move things along, and that is part of the reason why the budget request contains the $825 million amount to help implement this. We do think that in some cases, particularly for commuter systems, but also for some of the other rail systems, including short lines and so forth, that many of them will seek to take advantage of some of our programs, including potentially the RIF program, which you mentioned. So we are continuing to work through this issue, but we are hearing from industry that it's going to be tough to meet the deadline.
Now, just lastly, before we go to Red, the last question was, is the Railroad Rehabilitation and Improvement Financing Program a viable option to fund PTC? And have you gotten applications for this purpose?
I'd like to have our staff send you specifics on whether we've received applications. I'm not aware that we have, but let's confirm that. and I'll make sure we get that to you promptly.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate your commitment. We look forward to working with you on
Thank you.
this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. Ms. Granger?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. While we were under sequestration last year, the Department of Transportation came close to canceling contracts for airports that were in the contract tower program. And as a result, then Congress specifically included $140 million for that program in FY14 from this subcommittee. But the President's FY15 budget doesn't include that specific funding. So I'd ask you why it didn't, and also will you commit to funding the contract tower program without a specific line item in the FY15 third appropriations bill?
Congresswoman, the FAA's fiscal year 2015 budget does include funding to continue to operate the contract tower program. I'm not sure what the discrepancy may be, but we can certainly have our staffs reach back
Okay.
to you.
Good. Thank you.
Yes.
Another question has to do with your competitive surface transportation grant program. Can you tell me how that differs from the Tiger grant program?
Let's see. Are you talking about the CIIP program, the under the highway?
It's the competitive surface transportation grant program is the way it's listed.
I think it's the fixing and accelerating surface transportation. That's okay? So the FAST initiative is an initiative that is really driving innovation at the state and local level. We have, as you know, out of our $70+ billion budget, more than half of it is distributed to states by way of formula. And as I pointed out in my opening remarks, our desire is to attack the infrastructure deficit both by addressing the revenue issues through pro-growth business tax reform, and secondly, by addressing it by increasing efficiency in the system. Well, the reality is we have precious few tools to require that the states operate more efficiently. And so the FAST program is designed to award funding for projects in states that actually implement process innovations that are designed to accelerate the delivery of projects. So it's actually trying to use a carrot to get projects done faster. And our hope is by funding a few projects and incentivizing at the state level, we help all projects become moving forward on a more accelerated basis.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Quigley, we'll go in order of appearance here when the hearing started.
Specifically as possible. Ms. Lowy brought up the tragedy that took place in New York, surrounding areas. Positive train control. The first issue is, will there be an extension of this deadline or not? Do you conceive any way that this is going to go forward without an extension, and freight and passenger rail will be able to comply without it?
Well, Congress has basically put a deadline on positive train control, December 31st, 2015. And we're doing everything we can to help the rail industry get there. To be honest, what we're hearing from the rail industry is that they're not going to be able to make the deadline.
Right.
So we're going to keep doing everything we can, but I'm just telling you what we're hearing back from the rail industry.
And at some point, you all are going to have to help us. We got to do this together. There's lives at stake, but there's a certain realistic aspect to this, and how do we get this done as soon as possible? So, you know, at this juncture, it's hard for you to imagine that this is going to be, they're going to meet these deadlines without an extension.
I think that's fair to say. And, you know, again, we continue to offer any technical assistance that Congress may need as it looks at this issue.
And we appreciate that. The financial assistance outlined, the $825 million you talked about is one thing. There's also the current omnibus, which seems to give you extraordinary discretion about how to use funds to various rail programs. Would this be one of those that you would include?
We would use every tool at our disposal to try to help the industry meet the obligations under PTC.
Well, we would encourage you, given the risk that's involved. This tragedy could have taken place in Chicago or many other cities, unfortunately, just as easily. The time I have left, bicycles. It seems that we're buying fewer cars and driving fewer miles, and people, the good news is they're riding their bikes more. But in Illinois, the number of deaths, nationally in Illinois, the number of deaths attributed to automobile accidents has gone down. But it's not true for bikes and pedestrians. Those numbers have actually gone up, the deaths for bikes and pedestrians. Nearly 17% of Illinois traffic fatalities are now bicyclists and pedestrians. Will the Department of Transportation prioritize the establishment of separate performance measures for bike and pedestrian safety? And what's the stance on the rise in these fatalities and what you can do?
It is an issue of great concern to me as well, Congressman. Having been a mayor and having left a community that was seeing an uptick in both bicycle and pedestrian accidents and fatalities, we view that as one of the issues that we as a department need to tackle. And so it's one of my top priorities. We will be advancing a bill, as I said, as early as possible in August, and I'd love to have a conversation with you once that bill hits the street.
And in the meantime, if you could pass on to us some of the measures that you have that are possible to deal with these issues to the committee and to my staff, I'd certainly appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
I yield
sir.
back.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Mr. Rare Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Foxx, for being here. I have a few questions, so I'm going to talk a little fast. First, I'd like to focus on the New Starts title, specifically the Columbia River Crossing, which connects Vancouver, Washington to Portland, Oregon. And I see that the administration is requesting $65 million again for the project. And here's the problem. The project is dead. The only votes this project the only votes on this project in Clark County, Washington, where the bridge would land, on the Washington side, the Clark County residents voted against it not once but twice, in 2012 and then in 2013. Specifically, they voted against the light rail portion, which is where the funding that you all are proposing would go to, not necessarily fixing the bridge. And then the Washington State Legislature denied proposals to fund the project in 2013, a year ago, and then they didn't even consider it this session, which I think closes today or tomorrow. And then last week, the Oregon Legislature refused the only funding proposal left for the bridge, and now they've adjourned for the year. So I guess I want to know why the administration is still pushing a project on states and citizens who appear not to want it. And then secondly, what I really would like from the department is to finally acknowledge that this proposal is not the right one. We recognize, I believe we need a fix here. You know, the I-5 connects Canada and Mexico. It's a federal responsibility. We have to keep at this. But will you all refocus and help us come up with a real solution that both Oregon and Washington can support?
Well, let me say that at the time that our budget was developed, there was still activity associated with the project. And it is clear that the project, as it had been conceived and proposed, is not moving forward. And so for that reason, that's why it appears in our budget. We don't have large pools of discretionary dollars in the Federal Highway Administration to move getting a bridge like this done. And that's part of the reason I suspect that the proposal came to us the way it did, with a heavy FTA component to it. You know, I think the folks at the local level are going to have to pick up the pieces and figure out what they want to do, and we'll continue to try to help communities as we can.
So with that, and I think you hit the nail on the head, the community needs to decide what is best for them. In the meantime, and I agree, this project has gotten bigger and bigger and more costly and more costly. I mean, the light rail piece that you all were talking about funding was, I think, almost $200 million more than the most expensive mile of light rail in the country. So I definitely think we can do better with the limited resources that we have to work with. You know, one of the things I really want to see as we're putting together a solution, it is I-5, it is still a federal responsibility. It still needs to be shorn up for safety purposes. You know, I want to see us move people. Last year, your predecessor said we, quote, don't build bridges to get people places more quickly or relieve congestion. I'm not going to ask you to comment on your predecessor, but I would hope that as we're moving forward with a solution, that when we come up with something that's going to help us for safety purposes, it also is okay that we address congestion, and we'd like your help with that.
Well, you know, I have high admiration for my predecessor. He's a great guy, and I know a friend of many people in this room. But separate and apart from that, we as a department don't pick projects for communities. They pick them, and then we try to support them. And in this case, there was a coalition of folks at the local level and the state level that prodded this project along over a long period of time. If there is a different combination of folks that want to figure something else out, that's up to the community, and we will continue to wait and see what happens. We also
hopefully you will be willing to work with the community and help fund what the community comes up with. I guess that's backing into the question.
That's always our posture.
Okay.
We also have the problem of what to do with funds that have been sunk into this project, and we'll continue to work on that issue as well.
And before my time expires, skipping over, there is a lot of uncertainty over the shipping of oil through Southwest Washington via rail. And rightly, there are strong concerns regarding the safety of the rail cars and that carry the oil. And I think industry agrees that we need new safety standards. I assure you our communities are very much in support. And we are hoping that newer, stronger safety standards be issued as soon as possible. And where is DOT, or perhaps maybe on the next round you can answer where DOT is in the rulemaking process and what we should expect in new oil car safety regulations. So, and perhaps you can think about that and we can move on. Maybe you can answer that next round. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Price.
Mr. Secretary, the missing Malaysian airline flight jetliner has raised many questions that are relevant to several executive departments: Homeland Security, State, and especially Transportation. A massive international sea search with more than 40 planes and ships from at least 10 nations searching the area so far turned up no trace of the plane. But even if we were to quickly find the plane wreckage, many questions are going to remain until we have information that's contained in flight data recorders, or black boxes. In the event of an accident, this data is essential in determining what went wrong. And safety experts have worried for a long time that delays in retrieving recorder information that can help explain a crash can keep critical information hidden. Yet, recovering these black boxes and the data they track is no simple matter. We're reminded of that in the case of this Malaysian air flight. But nearly every major commercial air accident that's occurred over water or in remote areas has resulted in a costly and time-consuming recovery. And in many cases, including the planes that brought down the Twin Towers, the boxes are never recovered. In addition, some recorders, when they're found, don't yield high-quality data because they've been damaged by a crash. Now, there is technology, automatic deployable flight recorders, that's extremely useful in such instances. This technology is not new. It was developed in the 60s in Canada. It's been used by the military for decades. Deployable units. They usually contain both a flight data and cockpit voice recorder, as well as an emergency locator to help them be found. High-profile cases have led to the call for a broader application of deployables on commercial passenger aircraft, as you well know. The International Civil Aviation Organization currently has such a recommendation under consideration. A 1999 National Transportation Safety Board Recorder Symposium included a discussion of ADFR benefits. And the 9/11 Commission staff recommended that the federal government take steps to ensure the survivability and quick recoverability of black boxes from commercial air crashes. So as a result of these recommendations, I secured funding a few years ago for a pilot program at the Transportation Security Administration that successfully tested in concept the ability of ADFRs to improve rapid access to flight data following commercial aviation crashes, while also providing localization of downed aircraft and potential survivors. I'm one of a bipartisan group of members that has strongly urged the use of deployables on American commercial passenger aircraft. In fact, I've previously introduced legislation along with Representative Duncan of Tennessee, the SAFE Act, which would require the installation of a second backup set of deployable flight data and cockpit voice recorders on new commercial passenger aircraft, specifically those that are expected to operate long distances over ocean or remote location routes. This legislation will also create a reimbursement mechanism for the security upgrade. Well, now the need for this has once again been demonstrated. The pilot work has been done at TSA. The ball is in the FAA's court. I wonder what degree of attention you have paid at this early point to this deployable technology. As you know, the Fiscal 14 Appropriations Act, including language that encourages FAA to evaluate costs and benefits of this technology and to work with the NTSB to support U.S. and international initiatives to develop standards for use of this critical safety technology on commercial passenger aircraft. So I wonder if you could give us an update, what your agency is currently doing to follow through on this directive, and where you think we might go with this.
Well, thank you for the question. The FAA is doing exactly what you suggested, which is they are evaluating the technology, and specifically they're in the process of developing a plan to determine the cost-benefit of deploying the technology. It's unclear at this time, obviously, how that might have impacted the situation with the aircraft in Malaysia. There's a lot of activity around investigation there, and that remains a dynamic situation. But to your greater point, it's a technology that we're aware of, and we are working very hard. And you have my commitment to continue working hard to get this figured out.
Good. I do think it's time to move ahead on this, and you know, it surely wouldn't take too many searches like the one we're undertaking now. I mean, these costly, agonizing, expensive searches. I mean, how many of those would it take to pay for this on every commercial aircraft, particularly newly manufactured commercial aircraft going forward? You have to ask what kind of cost benefit ratio there would be here. I would think it would be highly favorable. This technology exists. It's been on military aircraft. The TSA has done its due diligence on this. I really urge you to move this ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Price. The gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first say how glad I am to be a new member of your subcommittee. Exciting subject. Secretary Foxx, thanks for being here today. This is kind of a strange question. I ask this both as chairman of the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee and as a new member of the Transportation Committee. One of the emerging issues that is being debated is the export of liquid and natural gas. Congress changed the law to allow your Maritime Administration jurisdiction over offshore LNG projects. The DOE has 2 permits to export LNG pending that, as noted, will require your Maritime Administration to oversee and approve construction and shipping. What arrangements and formal working relationships have you established with the Department of Energy to ensure that you are working through any applications and approvals expeditiously? And has your administrator formalized an agreement with the DOE for these offshore projects? Onshore projects, as you know, require FERC approval, but offshore, Maritime Administration and Department of Transportation must approve these. If not, why not? And if not, when can we expect to see you and Secretary Moniz maybe formalize a memorandum of understanding to move this forward?
Sir, I'd like to come back on the record on that question and get you a thorough response to it. That's one that it was a surprise.
Okay, thank you. Recently, the Department of Transportation released its Conditions and Performance Report on the nation's highway and transit systems. The report estimated highway and transit needs for all levels of government based on a range of growth assumptions. The low-end highway need was $123.7 billion per year, and the low-end transit need was around $22 billion annually. Higher-end assumptions was obviously higher, but about the same ratio. The highway need is about 6 times the transit need under the report that was done. And while I'm certainly not opposed to transit, there are great needs in both transit and highways. However, your budget and reauthorization proposal would change the proportions of federal support from today's 4-to-1 highway program dollars to transit program dollars ratio, basically 3-to-1, in spite of the fact that we still have about a 6-to-1 need ratio between highways and transit. Could you explain to me and the members of the subcommittee your reasoning behind this budget and how it seems to contradict what the report said?
Well, the report focuses on maintenance needs. It doesn't focus on future capacity needs. And so we're looking at a very limited, although a sizable limited, look at the overall system needs that we have as a country. That's the first point. The second point is that what our proposal, I want to make sure we're clear on what our proposal does and what it doesn't do. In order to shore up the Highway Trust Fund over a 4-year period, we need $63 billion to do that. Our proposal would, using pro-growth business tax reform and the transition dollars available, would put $150 billion into our surface transportation system, $63 billion of which would actually backfill the Highway Trust Fund. We don't change the split in the Highway Trust Fund. The 80-20 split that's been traditionally there would still be there even with the additional $63 billion. What is different is what we would do with the additional dollars above and beyond backfilling the Highway Trust Fund. And there, we're addressing needs that we see happening in metro regions across the country. This is not just an urban challenge of tackling the 100 million people that we're going to have in this country above what we have today and by 2050. This is also a suburban issue and a rural issue. Connecting these regions is going to be very important. Making sure people have predictable travel times that are consistent every single day is something that transit can give us that in some cases our highway system can't. So I say to you, it's not that we're changing the formula within the Highway Trust Fund. It's just with additional dollars from a new source gives us the ability to do what we believe the country needs.
Okay. Thank you. I can't see what the lights look like. Let me ask you this real quickly before it turns red. Your budget and reauthorization proposal would increase transit over 60%, but the rural transit program, so-called 5311 program, would increase by 2 or 3%. Assuming that there's to be some cost increases, that's effectively a decrease in the rural transit programs, while the others are receiving huge increases. Why is that, Mr. Secretary?
Actually, there are several programs that are added into our budget that we think will have significant rural components to them. For example, the bus rapid transit proposal, which is about $2.2 billion over 4 years. That proposal will actually help us connect rural areas, suburban areas, to metro areas, which are job centers, places where people can go to the doctor, pharmacy, or what have you. So I haven't done an exhaustive look at the numbers that you just gave out, but I'll be happy to have our staff respond back with really the full story on where the rural opportunities are.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Secretary Foxx. I have a lot of family that lives in Charlotte, and I remember the buzz down there when you were doing the light rail project. So it's good to have you at the helm now here, and knowing that that is a focus. I think it's the future of transportation. So thank you for your leadership already on this. Just to follow up on Mr. Simpson's question, we have a lot of, in eastern Ohio, we have a lot of natural gas that's now coming out of the ground, and we're looking for opportunities to ship it around the world if possible. And I think it ties into the situation we're dealing with right now in the Ukraine, where Ukraine gets 60 to 70% of its natural gas from Russia, and I think we have an obligation geopolitically to expedite the process the best we can. So I'll submit a question for the record, or unless you want to answer it, about generally what DOT is doing to address the infrastructure needs to help deal with the booming natural gas industry in some non-traditional areas like eastern Ohio and western PA.
Well, again, we will follow up with you on the record. PHMSA does provide a supporting function to the Federal Energy and Regulatory Commission's siting and approval process for LNG facilities. FERC is the ultimate authority that may grant a permit to construct LNG facilities, and we have several applications that are pending review at the department today that will help facilitate this issue, but I want to make sure we get you a full response, and we'll do it.
Okay, dealing with pipelines and all the rest, so we'll submit a couple questions that you can follow up on. The other question, too, I think there's an opportunity for us to convert a lot of our buses, for example, over to natural gas. And is there anything in this budget that can help expedite that process and help drive up some of the demand here in the U.S.?
We've had programs in the past, and we will continue to be entrepreneurial here with fuel alternative programs. In fact, back in the fall, we launched NOFA for one such effort. One of the conversations that is very robust in the transit community right now is this issue of alternative fuels. And I think what I would say here is that I think that over the next 5 to 10 years, what's going to happen is the conversation is going to become much more of a mainstream conversation, and some of our typical programs are also going to be programs that are supportive of these efforts. So I would look at the programs like the New Starts, the BRT proposal, and so forth as ones that have great potentiality to help on this issue.
Are there any incentives as far as getting the, we obviously have 1 million gas stations around. It's harder to put up stations for natural gas, for example. Is there anything in here that areas like mine could look at to try to at least get that up off the ground?
This is a place where the function of the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation have some intersect. Mm-hmm. I would like to come back to you with a specific response that takes into account both the DOT and the DOE impacts there to be more comprehensive.
Okay. I just think there's a great opportunity for this administration to take the lead on some of this. I mean, we have plentiful natural gas, and there's an opportunity for you to drive it. And we talk a lot about how do we get the post office working on natural gas? How do we use the Department of Transportation and the grant process for new buses or retrofits or whatever the case may be to move in this direction? So I think there's a great opportunity for you to take the lead here. One last question. I know this is more or less HUD, but there's some interaction and interfacing going on between Department of Transportation and HUD with the Livable Cities program. Can you talk a little bit? Is there money in here for that? Is that primarily funded through HUD, which I seem to think it is? And is there something that we could maybe do from this committee that would allow that to function better in your time that you've been there? Is there something we can do to? Because I think it's a great concept.
Yeah, we do see increasing intersection between the transportation facilities that are being placed in communities and the concomitant development that occurs around those facilities. And the Livable Communities Initiative has been a wonderful collaboration. We have quality of life measures, if you will, built into lots of our programs, and it's now becoming more, as I say, sort of more of a mainstream consideration as we look at some of our programs like New Starts, as we look at Tiger and others. We do have planning money in the Tiger grant process this year, $35 million, which can help communities plan, and we'll look to do that. I apologize, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. I want to thank you for your support for the Silver Line. out to Dulles Airport. That's been strongly supported by Secretary LaHood and by the entire congressional delegation in the House, and Senator Warner and Senator Kane in the Senate. I don't know if you met with Jack Potter yet. Have you spoken to Jack Potter? He's the head of the. I would recommend you might want to meet with the Airport Authority Board, but DOT's been very, very supportive. I wanted to thank you. And I'll call them and ask them to give your office a call if I can, because it's a great investment, and I think so. I wanted to ask you a question I've been thinking about. We're seeing more localities, even the District of Columbia, now moving toward legalizing marijuana. This committee has done yeoman's work on both sides of the aisle on all the safety issues. I was chairman of this committee for 6 years. Safety came up over and over. On .08, 21-year age drinking. Is anyone down at DOT looking at, I won't say the drunk driving aspect of smoking marijuana, driving an automobile, driving a truck? Or because I saw there was a conference out in Denver, the police were very confused on how they can see if there is a intoxication or whatever. Are you doing anything? Is anything planned on that?
NHTSA is currently conducting research to improve our understanding of this area. There are also state-level efforts that are underway that are supported by NHTSA, including a nationwide network of 7,000 drug recognition experts. These are officers who are trained to recognize and document signs of drugged driving. We also understand that states are also doing driver evaluations performed by these officers that assisted by criminal justice professionals. The reality here is that the Office of National Drug Control Policy is a partner with us on this issue, and while federal law has not changed, we recognize that this is an issue that needs to be tackled, and we'll continue being committed to working with states that have legalized marijuana to find acceptable standards.
Other countries, for instance, in Holland and places like that, to see what their experience was, or are you just domesticated, looking locally or in the United States, or are you looking abroad too?
As a data-based organization, our goal is always to look not only domestically, but to look internationally where we can. I'll come back to you with the specific nature of what NHTSA has looked at internationally.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know, sort of like the wedding feast at Canaan, you wanted to save the best for last, so I appreciate you being here, Secretary Foxx.
Time's expired.
I'd like to follow up, start with a statement and follow up with a question, and sort of tag on to what my distinguished colleague, Mr. Ryan, had brought up. That being, Mr. Secretary, I want to take a few moments to raise with you the growing importance of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway System for the moving of commercial goods by water to and from the Great Lakes region. As you know, 90% of all trade around the world moves by water. It is critical that we educate domestic and overseas industries on the safety, reliability, and environmental advantages of moving their products on and through the Great Lakes Seaway System. It is an underutilized asset. Under your leadership, the Department's St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation has safely and efficiently operated and maintained the U.S. portion of the St. Lawrence Seaway for more than half a century. I'm pleased to see the President's FY 2015 budget request continues to support the SLSDC's multi-year asset renewal program to modernize the U.S. seaway assets and a proactive approach to infrastructure renewal. This program is crucial to ensuring the long-term reliability of the seaway for our regional industries. I've recently met with Seaway Administrator Betty Sutton and would ask your office to begin working with the SLSDC to find new ways to utilize the corporation's current and possibly future authorities to expand the economic development and job creation in the region. A number of us in the Great Lakes Coalition have been discussing this concept of transforming the SLSDC to advance the regional economic development, and we'll be sending you our ideas in the near future. Follow up on the question, sir. Funding has been allocated in the administration's budget for a rapid growth area transit program, which is meant for communities experiencing fast-growing populations. In northeastern Ohio, we have the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, or RTA, which does an excellent job servicing Cleveland, and although transit ridership is growing at a rate higher than the national average, unfortunately, Cleveland is not an area where the population is currently expanding. Just as important as growing our transit is taking care of our current transit assets, such as RTA's bus fleet and rail infrastructure. What is the administration's vision for maintaining our current transit infrastructure?
It's a very good question, and when it comes to our transit infrastructure, we have to recognize that we are seeing over the next 30 years 100 million new people net in this country, which is going to create a lot of pressure on our conventional transportation systems. That's one of the reasons why this issue of an infrastructure deficit that I mentioned at the outset is so important. We've got to tackle that because we're going to outstrip our ability to move people in a quick fashion if we don't. Having said that, we have a significant amount of money set in our budget for state of good repair needs. That money is there specifically to try to deal with maintenance issues that you just mentioned. The rapid growth transit part of the program is one that is designed for communities that are experiencing the kind of population surges that I'm talking about. And our criteria for that program would basically fall down to three areas. Communities that are experiencing moderate to significant population growth. Secondly, moderate to significant transit ridership growth. And third, the capacity to pay the operating expenses associated with the additional capacity. Again, as I pointed out earlier, we don't view this as a specific program for urban areas. We think this is actually going to support suburban areas as well as rural areas too that are connected.
So in other words, if we hit points 2 and 3, we won't be denied?
I think if you hit points 1, 2, and 3, you're going to be fine.
Well, the population isn't growing in Northeast Ohio.
Well, you know what? I think the issue is you have lots of options for transit funding in this proposal. You have the options under new starts, small starts, in addition to this particular program. And so our proposal is going to try to help address these issues wherever they happen to be. But in your case, maybe it may be a small starts as opposed to this program, but there are going to be opportunities. I would just encourage the committee and the Congress that we shouldn't prejudge the outcome on the funding source. We're open to other ideas, but we think the pro-growth business tax reform is one that hits the sweet spot for this Congress.
Great. Thank you for your time. I yield back.
Thank you, the gentleman. Mr. Secretary, you're proposing to fund the Tiger at $1.25 billion, Tiger grants, which is a high water mark for this account, certainly outside of the stimulus. But DOT really has yet to demonstrate publicly that it has the capacity to competitively compare projects in a manner that clearly shows the national interest and national or even regional. In a 2011 report on the Tiger program, the GAO found project selection data to be limited and cited an absence of documentation for awards made contrary to the recommendation of application reviewers. I'm looking at some winning projects funded in the last 2 years of Tiger grants, and some of these really do not appear to meet any kind of a national interest. The city of Fresno received $16 million toward a $20 million reconstruction of a pedestrian mall, which is really ironic considering most of your projects are geared to taking cars off the road. The city of Fresno didn't even vote on the proposal of the Tiger grant until February of 2014. You'd already given the grant. They hadn't even approved it. I don't know how you could effectively evaluate the merit of the project when the city didn't even know what the money was going to be used for. And Missoula County received $4.6 million toward a 7-mile bicycle trail between Missoula and Lolo, Montana. I don't know if that's Montana's #1 transportation need. South Florida Regional Transportation Authority received $18 million towards an $83 million streetcar line. It should have been evaluated and funded under the New Starts or Small Starts program. The City of Philadelphia received $19 million towards an almost $26 million transit state of good repair effort. State of good repair is a requirement under the core capacity program, and Philly got a windfall over and above other transit systems. I think the department's really demonstrated you haven't gotten it right, and the GAO recommendations should give a serious look at that. I can't see a reason to grossly increase the amount of earmarked money, and whether you're doing it or whoever, until we can see how the money is being allocated and the criteria that you use to evaluate the programs, which obviously you're not following. And Tiger grants. Tell me anything here that has national or regional interest, which was supposed to be part of the Tiger grant.
Well, let me start with a couple of points. First, the Tiger program has done tremendous amounts of good across this country. The criteria that is used by the team to go through and evaluate projects, a project can be of national significance, but a project can also be of regional and local significance too. And in the case of Fresno, for instance, there was an application submitted by the city of Fresno for that project. My guess is, although I'd like to come back and confirm that.
They hadn't even voted on it.
There was an application for a proposal from the city of Fresno. We don't make grants if there hasn't been a request. There was a request. So
why is that national interest?
Well,
or even regional interest?
Let's look at Fresno. Fresno is one of the poorest cities in America. The mayor of Fresno.
Transportation.
Absolutely. And transportation has economic development
pedestrian mall
aspects of it. The city of Fresno has basically a downtown core that has been stripped out over years. The mayor is trying to redevelop that city to create more momentum so that the region can attract jobs for the community. And in that particular case, that project is right. Transportation creates jobs.
For a pedestrian mall.
Transportation creates jobs. It's not,
what does this
not just
have
a
to do with
pedestrian mall. It's
transportation?
opening up the center city
What does it
for
have
cars.
to do with transportation?
It's actually opening the center city for cars.
It's a pedestrian mall.
It's a pedestrian mall that's being removed so that cars can move through, so the downtown can grow.
And the GAO says that the projects were selected in the absence of documentation for awards made contrary to recommendations by the application reviewers. So your own reviewers were saying these did not qualify, but went ahead anyway and gave out these grants.
Was that in the year 2013?
2011.
Right. That predated the projects you're talking about.
Have you changed the criteria?
We are using objective criteria. I'm not aware of any projects that I've supported that have gone against the staff recommendation.
Again, I mean, you're asking for $1,250 million for things that have nothing to do, and even people haven't approved locally as far as being a priority. So, and I see I'm out of time, but we need to talk further, obviously, on this subject. So, Mr. Pasteur.
Sure, to me. In the final FY14 bill, we included about $42 million for rail corridor planning and safety activities. Fiscal year 14 will end September 30th, or the end of September. How will the FRA solicit applications for the initiative, and when do you expect it to start making awards?
Could you repeat the question, sir?
How soon do you think
planning?
the FRA will solicit applications for this initiative, the $42 million that was in the 14 bill? And when would you expect it to make awards of this money?
Our goal there would be to get the process started as soon as possible. It's been, because the budget was approved relatively recently, I know our team is working to try to get it done as soon as possible this spring. So the goal would be to get it. I can't give you a specific date. I'll have to come back to you on a date, but I expect that to happen early spring.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That'll be fine. And also in this bill, the FY14 bill, we included about $600 million of additional money for Tiger grants, which you will have the opportunity to decide on.
Yes.
And following the chairman's comments, what is your expectation in terms of how soon? Well, are you going to go back to old applications to be considered in this new money? Is this going to be just new applications, and when do you plan to start the process and begin awarding the money? It's the fiscal year ends the end of September.
Sure. If I'm correct, the notice of funding availability was made public 2 weeks ago today, sir. And the application period will close April 28th.
So let me interrupt you. So that means only applications that have come in during this period will be considered.
They have to be new applications.
New
And many times we find that communities resubmit round after round, but they do have to submit.
And you anticipate awards, what, end of August, sometime in August?
We hope sometime before the end of
September?
the summer. Yes, sir.
Okay. In the past years, and I bring it to your attention because this has been a situation with the Department of Transportation, and there's been a number of studies by different institutions, and it deals with your IT and computer capabilities, technology, equipment, and it seems that over the years, less money and assets have been given to continually update your computers, your programming, your cybersecurity, and I don't know what you have in this year's budget, but it is something that in the past this subcommittee has heard from various institutions that have investigated and analyzed Department of Transportation. So I bring it to your attention because it is something that we've talked about and have heard about over the years, and it's something that you may want to begin, if you haven't done it already, begin investigating where you're at. And then in this budget, do you address some of the problems that you know, that you may know are there?
Yes, sir. It is an issue of concern for us. That's one of the reasons why our IT director has been very focused in leading cross-departmental teams to develop a strategy for the department on this issue, and we're implementing protocols all the time designed to tighten up our cybersecurity situation, but it is an evolving issue. It's dynamic, and as resources are needed, we will certainly make sure that comes to the attention of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Herrera Butler.
Thank you. And back to the question, would you like me to kind of repeat?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Got a few cents.
Shipping of oil, rail on rail, particularly through Southwest Washington, naturally, people are concerned about the safety. And as in speaking to industry leaders, they're ready and willing to move forward on newer, tighter standards that ensure safety. I guess what I'm also hearing in some concerns is where DOT is in the rulemaking process. Because I think everybody agrees. In fact, what I'm hearing from certain folks is they're going to shoot for the highest known safety standards and move forward because they've been waiting for the rule for some time, and we kind of need to move forward. So I guess I wanted to know where DOT was at with that.
We are continuing to work to move this rule along as quickly as we can.
What kind of timeline do you see?
It's hard to say, but I tell you that we're working as hard as we can. It is not lost on me that this is an area of need in terms of certainty for the industry. We called the industry to action about a month and a half ago, and the rail industry has been really good about offering voluntary steps. We have to have all of the above strategy on this issue. It is not just the tank cars, by the way. It's also addressing some prevention-oriented areas, such as testing the material, which we've issued fines and also executive orders to require that the material be tested and classified appropriately. It's also a matter of, obviously...
You mean the commodity?
Yes, the actual crude oil itself, to make sure that it's packaged properly. And in addition to that, we also think that there are other measures that we will be continuing to work through. But you trust me when I say that we're going to work as hard and fast as we can to get this rule out and on the street as soon as possible.
All right, and switching gears to general aviation, the president's budget again calls for user fees both on commercial and general aviation, and Congress has repeatedly rejected this proposal. And I guess I would say, since you're coming back with it again, have you studied the impacts this would have on general aviation and the related economy around this industry? And I guess I would ask, as we're talking about where money is being spent and how it's being spent, where it comes from is pretty important as well. And is that part of the consideration?
Well, in the case of the mandatory surcharge that you're mentioning, the Treasury Department estimates that would generate about $960 million in FY15 and about $11.4 billion over the next 10 years.
So that's money taken out of the industry. So have you studied what impact that would have on the industry itself? I mean, because it's a
well, part of the purpose of it is to help with deficit reduction.
So it's not about necessarily whether or not we talked about jobs and inner cities and growing jobs, and transportation helps us grow jobs, and so, but to take the money out of the industry that is in large part small business and private jobs come from there, as does wealth, to take it out of there, is that, so now we're focusing on deficit reduction, it's not about jobs?
Well, I have a lot of easy choices to offer you. And one of them is that the proposal that the administration has offered over several terms have offered this up as one part of a deficit reduction strategy, but also as a way of trying to more equitably share the cost of the air traffic space to the users. So I highlighted the deficit reduction aspect of it because I understand that is an issue that this Congress cares deeply about, and it's also something that the President cares deeply about.
So with that, I guess, one of the things I would just mention, and the Chairman spoke to it in his opening remarks about a long-term plan. With the trust fund going dry, I applaud that you're looking for places to get financing, but what we really need is a long-term, big-picture plan to pay for repairing our aging infrastructure. And I think you're right, having the infrastructure in place can help us grow jobs, but I guess I would say we can't keep coming back to proposals that have been shot down in a bipartisan way, so to speak, and look for a bigger picture proposal. And I guess I'd ask you to consider that as we move forward. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, just to return for the moment to the discussion about the Tiger program, I heard your strong defense. I certainly agree with that defense of that program and the uses to which it's been put. I certainly can testify to that in terms of the rail facilities, the Union Station project in Raleigh, which is going to facilitate rail transportation, but also be a transportation hub. It's going to spur lots of economic development in that part of town and so forth. It's money well spent. And if the question is there a demand for this, I do have the figures from the last 3 fiscal years. Fiscal 11, we were talking about $14.1 billion in Tiger applications for $527 million. Fiscal 12, $10.2 billion in applications for $500 million. Fiscal 13, $9 billion in application for $500 million. Sounds to me like there's a need out there. That's not to say every last one of these applications is worthy, But when you got $9 billion worth of applications and $500 million to dispense, you can be pretty selective, and you can apply those criteria, and it sounds to me like you're doing just that. Moving to a couple of other programs, I want to ask you about the adequacy of the funding levels. The capital investment grants you have stressed in this budget, and here too, I wonder if you could comment on the current level of interest in the program. How many takers are there out there who would communities that would like to get started with transit or who would like to expand their transit systems? Of course, your home city of Charlotte has benefited greatly from these resources, and we now have a project development agreement in Durham, Chapel Hill. That's good too. There's plenty of demand out there. You have proposed $2.5 billion for the Capital Improvement Grant Program for 2015. That's $500 million boost over current funding levels. I wonder if you could comment on the adequacy of that, or what it'll let you do, and as compared, let's say, to the flat funding that was proposed in MAP 21. And then finally, the Rapid Growth Area Transit Discretionary Grants. That anticipates bus rapid transit development. Here too, you're requesting an additional $500 million for this new discretionary grant program targeting BRT. How does that relate to the capital investment grant program? You think this new pilot in the BRT area would remove some of the pressure on new starts? You know, there's a lot of debate going on in my community, as you know, about the virtues of BRT and rail. They're complementary. The plan that we're envisioning would be complementary, but there are questions, for example, maybe you'd want to comment on them, on the relative impact that a BRT system is likely to have on economic development as opposed to light rail, encouraging economic development because of the fixed right-of-way. So how do you see the new money for BRT intersecting with the more generous funding, still not overly generous, I would say, for new starts?
Great question, Congressman. And within the New Starts program, we think that this is an area where the uncertainty and unpredictability of the past years has worked a very difficult problem for local project sponsors, because many of them have to go through an extensive and expensive design process to even get to the point where they get into the federal program, as the Durham project has. And because of that, there's pent-up demand on the one end, but what is important here is not just the amount, but is actually having a pathway over a 4-year period of time to get projects from the planning stages into the design stages so they can actually move forward. I would say that the demand for new starts is increasing, and the need for it is also increasing because of the population trends that I mentioned before. How it relates to the BRT program is that there will be communities that, for whatever reason, cannot or do not want to go to the extent of putting in rail to support their systems, but they need rapid support for fast-growing populations, and the BRT program is designed to address those situations.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any more questions, but that won't stop me from saying something.
Sure.
Yeah. And I say this respectfully. One of the biggest problems we face in this country, other than the debt and deficit we're facing in this nation, is our infrastructure backlog. I'm not just talking about roads and bridges. I'm talking waterways, harbors, dams, the electrical grid, water and sewer systems throughout this country. Most of them are reaching their expected life expectancy. We've got a $700 billion water and sewer problem. We throw about $5 billion a year at it, which means 150 years from now we can address the backlog that exists today. Funding streams are going down. My wife, the example I use, my wife gave me her SUV that got 18 miles a gallon, went and bought a Prius. She gets 52 miles a gallon, which means she drives 52 miles a gallon. I mean, she drives the same distance she used to, pays 40% of the gas tax that she used to pay, putting the same wear and tear on the road. We're getting more efficient cars. What are you going to do about electric cars? And I got to tell you in all honesty, the plan here that says we're going to have a pro-growth business tax reform, and we could have a real debate about whether this is pro-growth or not, because I kind of fail to see how a retroactive tax on LIFO that brings in revenue one time, that funds something for 4 years, is actually a long-term solution. And what we need, and sometimes this takes presidential leadership, administrative leadership, is how are we going to address these funding needs in the future on a permanent basis? And I don't think a one-time solution that fixes it for 4 years theoretically is going to do the trick. So I just throw that out there. There are many of us in Congress, and believe me, if I had the answer, I'd be brilliant, and I'm not. I'd be the Secretary of Transportation, but I'm not. And what we, yeah. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. But what we need is to work both with Congress and the administration to solve some of these problems in the long term. I'm not going to like the solution. Neither are you. It's going to be tough solutions that are going to require some tough decisions by Congress. And so we need to be able to work together to try to solve this on a long-term basis rather than this, let's fix it for now, and we got an election this year, so let's not do anything now, and we'll do it the year after that. But as you know, we're always up for election. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's just me ranting. If you'd like to.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind. First of all, I appreciate the sentiment. Our proposal is really calibrated to deal with the fact that this is not a new problem. This is a problem that's been around for a while. And as I mentioned in the opening of my comments, 18 continuing resolutions since 2009. While the gaps ultimately have gotten filled, what's missing in the equation, maybe invisible to folks in Washington, but I saw very clearly as a mayor, is that you don't know what tomorrow looks like. And so I completely agree with you that the issue of addressing this problem is important. But because there hasn't been a settling point on getting to a longer answer, this proposal actually may not be perfect in the eyes of some, but it's a proposal that addresses what we understand are some of the touch points in this Congress around taxes and lots of other things. So we don't apologize for this proposal. It's a good proposal. And if there are other ideas that emerge in this Congress that are better ideas that get us a longer draw on solving the problems that we have, as we've said, we're open to them. But we believe that it's important for us to have a proposal that we think has bipartisan interest and put it forward, and that's exactly what this is. Thank you. Yes, sir.
If I can just comment on that, you should also be aware that this administration has never made a proposal, never put forth legislation in an authorization or a pay-for to do exactly what you talked about. So I just want to make that point. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just follow up on what Mr. Simpson was saying. I think that a big, bold infrastructure proposal, and I get it, this is short term, let's do what we can, let's use this immediate revenue to do what we can do in the short term. I think the American people will support it because there's a lot of people in the city of Akron right now, for example, they need combined sewer. It's outdated. It's $600, $700, $800 million. If they bond that out themselves, the rates are going to go up dramatically in the city, as you know as a mayor, further drive people to the suburbs, which is going to put more of a burden for water, sewer, transportation costs for all the rest of us to keep the sprawl going. Meanwhile, our cities are rotting. So I think the initiative from the administration would be supported. And I think Mr. Simpson's right, and I don't normally say that publicly about my buddy. But I think there could be a bipartisan support. So I would also encourage you and the President to step out on this issue, and we will support you. And we will go out and make the argument to the American people, because they're driving on the roads, and you look in Ohio and a lot of the other places, because of the cold winter, the roads are a wreck now, all over the place. I just want to encourage you to do that, and we're happy to sit down and work with you on it. Two other things. I want to speak to the Tiger Grant that has had an amazing ripple effect in Kent, Ohio. $20 million has led to over I think, $110 million in other matching investments, whether state, local, private investments. There's hotels now, there's downtowns, there's businesses. They're now talking about phase 2 of it, of this project, tying the university together, Kent State University, with the city of Kent. It's been an amazing project. So these Tiger grants, I think, are a major benefit to a lot of communities. And then lastly, let me just say, in what Mr. Joyce brought up with the St. Lawrence Seaway, I think there's a great opportunity for the administration here as well to use the St. Lawrence Seaway organization as an opportunity for more economic development in the Great Lake regions. If you look at where the manufacturing institutes that the President is pushing, 15 and eventually 45 of them, one's in Youngstown, Ohio, one's in Detroit, one's in Chicago, all in the Great Lakes region. So to take an initiative like this and basically say the St. Lawrence Seaway organization could be a port authority for economic development for the entire Great Lakes region, I think would put us in a great position in all of these older industrial areas and give us one more tool in the toolbox for economic development. So I'd also ask you to look very closely at that. I don't have a question. I'm just following the leadership of my friend, Mr. Simpson. Yes?
If I might, let me just further to this question of the proposal. One thing our proposal does that, as I'm listening to the conversation, there's sort of several different conversations. There's some that say it should be longer. And to that we say, we're open to ideas. Show us how you pay for it. We've got to pay for it. We're ready to work on it. What our proposal also does is that it goes above Highway Trust Fund current levels to increase funding and support for infrastructure in this country. And I think if I could leave you with one point, it is that backfilling the Highway Trust Fund is helpful, but if that's kind of looking through the rearview mirror. If we're looking at the windshield, we've got an awful lot coming at us in terms of population and needs as a country. And I think what can get lost in this conversation is the fact that we are offering a proposal that substantially increases investment in American infrastructure above current levels. And if there's another way to do that folks think is more doable, we're open to those ideas.
No, I hear you, and I'm supportive of the proposal. This is a short term, right. Because that's the political situation we're in right now, and there's no doubt about it. Maybe me and Mr. Simpson can put something together, or maybe not. I don't know. All right, yield back the balance of my.
Gentleman yields back, Mr. Joyce.
Thank you. And following up on the manufacturing aspects that Mr. Ryan has brought up, also eastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania are that oil and gas play that Mr. Ryan had brought up. And there's a tremendous ability to direct ship from the Great Lakes to Europe. So that's another reason why it makes that St. Lawrence Seaway project very important for us. But there is in the President's proposal to fund highway and transit investment, assumes that the Highway Trust Fund will receive a one-time infusion of revenues from tax reform. I'm curious, what is the administration is proposing as far as their vision for our nation's airports?
Well, as you know, we have a FAA reauthorization process that is going to happen over the next year or so, and we expect robust discussion on a bipartisan basis as we look to frame a vision for the longer term there. I think as far as the budget proposal is concerned, we think that this proposal offers not only an opportunity to continue advancing our airspace and our air systems, allowing us to continue to move forward with emerging technologies. Unmanned airspace is potentially one of them, but also to continue to modernize the airspace through next-gen and other technologies. So we have in this budget proposals that help us continue moving the ball in the airspace, but I think the reauthorization process will open up new debates about how we go forward on a more long-term basis.
So that proposal is basically you're talking about the FAA and what you're going to do for the infrastructure for the airports?
Yeah, I mean, we continue the airport investment program. We continue to invest in the back office systems that support national airspace. We continue to try to modernize it using 21st century technology, working hard to get us off of the World War II radar systems into a 21st century GPS system. Those are the types of things that we're going to continue working towards.
So I take that support for next gen?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Okay, we just started, started a vote on the floor, so I think we'll conclude the hearing right now, and you must create a lot of interest. This is the first time I've ever seen 100% participation of a subcommittee. And that's probably because of the afternoon hours and everything, too, that we have. But, yeah, I think it's my leadership.
Why is he sucking up?
I don't know. If I did earmarks like the secretary does, you'd get one, Simpson. Anyway, no. But thank you very much. It's extraordinarily important that we maintain open and free dialogue and communicate. Obviously, we're not going to agree on everything and prioritize, but the only way we're going to be able to be successful and get our bill done is, and have you folks support it, certainly is going to have that open communication back and forth, and we look forward to having that continued communication, and thank you very much for your participation today and for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Committee's adjourned.
I think the only thing that